Dr. Rachael, I want to welcome you. Thank you for coming all the way out to Abilene.
Thank you.
Good to have
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are talking about temperament. This is Temperament 101.
Yes.
Very exciting topic. It's so valuable. It's so important, as you know. And I've been talking with our viewers about the three areas of temperament: inclusion, control, and affection, and that the 5 different temperaments operate in those areas.
Yes.
And there are also potential blendings within each of those areas. So we have to get to each of those blendings to help our viewers better understand what that entails. Okay? So let's jump right into it right now and talk about the melancholy temperament.
Sounds great.
All right.
Yes.
So the melancholy is the self-focused, the more self-absorbed, the more inward, introverted temperament. And I don't mean selfish when I say that, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, anybody can be selfish. There's people who are, obviously of any temperament that have, evil thoughts and are jealous and envious and wicked. But then there's people in the melancholy temperament, what we're talking about here is just someone who thinks about themselves. They have this characteristic about themselves where they're more inwardly focused. Could you help us understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, so, with each of these temperaments, they all have strengths and weaknesses, certainly, and they all contribute in different ways to how we relate to one another. So if you can kind of picture a melancholy like a turtle, kind of having a shell over them, that's what the melancholy does, and they have a very high sense of truth and order. They like things to be a certain way. They're very task-oriented as opposed to people-oriented, meaning if they could choose between going to a social versus, getting a job done, they would always choose the job to be done,
right.
Mostly to avoid socialization. And it's not that they're unfriendly people. It's just that it's very draining for them.
Right.
To be around others.
But that need for truth, it's more of a need for truth within themselves. Like they're not so concerned with forcing others to understand things and be true and be righteous and upright people. It's more like in their own innermost being, they have to be true to themselves. You would agree with that?
I do, yeah. And they are always up in their heads trying to figure things out.
So in your experience in counseling, why does a melancholy typically come to get therapy? What are the top 5, let's say?
Top 5, a lot of times they are just struggling in general with depression and anxiety. And a lot of that is simply due to the overthinking. They are overthinking in a lot of different areas. They tend to feel inferior toward others.
Okay. So low ego, low self-esteem.
Low ego. They tend to feel badly about themselves. And a lot of that is simply their perfectionistic nature. So they just have a hard time really understanding where they are in the world because they are so focused on themselves. So they're not getting as much interaction or feedback as other temperaments are.
So what are some of the detrimental things to being so self-focused? What is it? Why is it so difficult for someone who's in that situation?
One, they're not very socially expressive, and so they are not giving much out to the world in terms of relationship other than leave me alone. So everyone's getting the Heisman with them. And then as they start thinking about things over and over and over, if something isn't right or if they believe that they've been wrong somehow, they really have huge outbursts of anger. And that's something that we can work on is just their perspective of, maybe somebody didn't slight you. So we work a lot on not being offended with everything. Not everything is personal. Someone may have just walked into the room and not seen you. It's not that they were avoiding you.
Yeah.
That kind of
thing. They're not
thing.
victimizing you. You're just taking it as if you're a victim.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Rachel, when it comes to children, we know that there's a lot of parents out there who have children who are melancholies. In fact, melancholy is a very common temperament.
Yes.
Like there's way more melancholies than there are cholerics,
Yes.
for example.
Thank goodness.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I'm a choleric.
I know.
But anyway, when it comes to parents who have children that are melancholy,
Yes.
what would you advise them? And oftentimes, like, why do you see them bringing their kids to counseling?
That's a great question. A lot of times they do bring them to counseling because they just find it hard to relate to them. The kid's not giving them a whole lot of feedback on what their interests are, what they're thinking. They look depressed. They play video games all day long, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so, you know, the parents are just desperate to relate to their child in a way that is amenable to that kid. So parents get worried about them, and you know, melancholies really do just go so inward and then want to isolate themselves. They don't need a whole lot of interaction socially, and we covered that, but they also don't need a whole lot of affection. Oftentimes. And so even...
You mean like displays of affection?
Displays of affection. They do need it, but, you know...
But not in the form of hugs and kisses so much.
Right. So the parent might be going in to give the kid a hug, and the kid's just like real stiff.
Right.
And, you know, it's confusing to a parent, especially if the parent's a sanguine or, you know...
Right.
Someone that needs a whole lot more input.
You were talking about the way that their brain works is like a spiral, and they can spiral in a negative way down. How does that manifest regarding children? Like when the parents are bringing their kids into counseling and the kids are stuck in this spiral thinking or this negative downward thinking, what does that look like? What kind of things are they doing that shows that is their frame of mind that they're stuck in? And how would you get them out of it?
Yeah, so melancholies really do tend to fixate on the negative in particular. So they will, you know, if they had a great day at school and then somebody blew them off in carpool, you know, mom asked them in the car, how did school go? It was awful. The whole thing was awful. So they just... all of a sudden, they get in the spiral thinking because that person blew them off, that now everything was bad and that's all they can think of. And then they go into the afternoon and doing homework, and even the night, that's all they can think of.
It's like a chain reaction.
Slight. Yes.
All day long, they can't get off of it.
Exactly. And so to help them manage their feelings, or as the Lord puts it, to take our thoughts captive, what we have to do is show that child that, first of all, not everything is bad. It's not this global, massive, terrible scene, that there are good things in there. And you know what you've done, and it is helpful for them to see the spiral. So I usually draw that, but I'll also have them name, you know, 5 things that really went well, and in particular 5 new things every day.
5 new things every day.
Yeah,
okay.
That have gone well. And this is just what I do, but I have them post it in their bathroom or somewhere in their room up on the wall, and they just keep adding to it. And so when they find themselves in this downward spiral, they can go over and fixate on the good things that not only happened yesterday and the day before and the day before that, but then 5 new things for today. And it helps them realize, okay, my thinking is generating my emotion here. And so if I can think myself down into sadness or depression, I can also think myself up into joy and gladness.
It's amazing how much power we have over our own thoughts. You know, we don't have to be a victim of our thoughts.
Right.
And that passage that you were talking about, just for the sake of our viewers, is 2 Corinthians 10:5, which says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing every thought captive to the obedience of Christ.
Love it when someone can actually know the address and
That's
the
it. That's a
full-
beautiful verse.
Yes.
I really love that verse. I'm glad you brought that up. As we've talked about before, the melancholy is task-oriented, not people-oriented. And so that, it can be a benefit, like especially if you have a job and processes and procedures and projects and planning and things like
Yes.
that. It's awesome to have that kind of brain.
Yes.
Like I don't have that kind of brain. I'm sanguine in my inclusion area, so I have more scattered thinking. But the melancholy, it's like they're always in a process. And so that can actually become a detriment. That could be a problem when it comes to relationships with people, right? Because they treat their relationships like they would a task. So what would you tell someone who's experiencing that in life? Or let's say somebody who's married to a melancholy. You know, what does that look like and how would you help them?
Yeah, so melancholies are very creative. They are usually brilliant-minded, extremely creative, and that's really a benefit. That's kind of, that would be more their emotional outlet, would be their creative bent.
Yeah.
And so, they can relate to a spouse or significant other, even, writing a song or, just expressing creatively whatever that outlet is to their significant other. And that's helpful. But on a nuts and bolts basis, having since the melancholy is so calculating, they can also be told to, make sure that you hug your kids once a day or once in the morning and once at night. Don't let a day go by that you don't actually touch them because they will.
So we have to give them a strategy, a plan that they can follow.
Yeah, and they're willing to do so because they really want to please. They want to do a good job. They genuinely care about others, but they're just never going to seek that attention or affection. So teaching them how to be a little bit more assertive with that, not because it's meeting their needs so much, but that's what we do in loving and serving one another, is we meet their needs.
Right.
And then, just making sure that they have enough downtime, say coming home from work, letting the spouse know, okay, the melancholy spouse is going to need to sit in the car for a little bit by themselves if it's cray-cray inside. At dinner time, it always is.
Right.
But, or, just let them go into their room, take their jacket off, take their shoes off, but then suggest to the melancholy that once they come and enter back into the family, they need to be on for them.
Right.
So they do get their time, but not all the time.
You can recharge, but now you have to use that charge.
That's right, for everyone else, yes.
So as we know, there are two temperaments that tend to be very negative in their thinking at times and fall into that spiral and have feelings of worthlessness. And those two are the supine and the melancholy.
Right.
So this question that I have for you is really applied to both of those kinds of temperaments. And that is, if you have that downward spiral and you are self-medicating or you are addressing that within yourself by some kind of destructive behavior, let's say an addiction to drugs, an addiction to excessive alcohol, an addiction to sex or pornography or something like that, how does someone get out of it? How does someone escape that?
Yeah, well, you may need help if you're truly breaking out of an addiction more than just, taking thoughts captive. But for both of them, ideally, you would want to have them really focus on the Lord and His love and acceptance of them, because they have to seek that first. If the melancholy, for instance, has not been introduced to the Lord at an early age, it can be a lot harder for them to accept that the Lord actually loves them, in late adulthood, only because of their temperament, because they just decide something and that's kind of it. So it's hard to break that down. The supine's a little softer on that, but to get them out of that spiral, changing the location of where they are is good. That's one thing they can do. So literally get up and walk out the door, walk around the block.
So the environment makes a difference.
The environment does, and also the people that they are around need to be very understanding of their temperament. So really educating others on when, these more, I hate to say depressive temperaments, but the ones that tend to go negative.
To go that way, yes, they're prone to it.
Yes, and having their loved ones just learn ways to kind of bring them out a little bit more. And then creative outlets are very helpful, but ultimately really thinking on things that bring them joy and doing things that make them feel fulfilled and accepted and approved. That's just very important to them.
Yes, I agree, 100%. It's so important for us to find the avenue whereby we're going to focus on the positive things in life. And that's really what it says in Philippians 4, verse 8. Whatsoever things are noble, true, just, of good report, all of that. Dwell on these things, and there's a spiritual promise. The God of peace will be with you.
Yes.
So we're not consigned to the defeat. If we have one of these temperaments, we're not going to necessarily live that way the rest of our lives. There's a way to break free.
There is a way to break free, and all of us have strengths and weaknesses. All of us do. It's just our responsibility to figure out, okay, to figure out and at least be aware of when we're functioning in our weakness versus our strength. And so, if your weaknesses, you tend to go dark real quick, finding those ways to elevate your mood and the things that make you uncomfortable, but it breaks you out of that downward spiral. It's just so important because we not only have a responsibility to ourselves, but to those around us.
Right.
And to actually offer ourselves in the best way that we possibly can. I mean, that's why we're here.
Okay, so also, Rachel, as you know, the melancholy is not the only temperament in inclusion. There's also melancholy-phlegmatic.
Yes.
And that's a blending. And so a lot of people take the APS survey and they're researching and studying and hearing from their therapist about temperament, and they're confused because they're like, I'm not a melancholy, I'm melancholy-phlegmatic. So what is the difference here? Could you explain to us what the difference is?
Sure, be happy to. So if the melancholy tends to be on the darker side of things sometimes, phlegmatic is more in the middle, and then it goes up from there. So phlegmatic tends to be probably the most even-tempered of the temperaments, and they relate both to tasks and people. They need a lot of reassurance, but they also aspire a little bit more to be involved with others than a melancholy. So they're just super even keeled, and they get the job done. So a melancholy phlegmatic is going to present as a melancholy, and we covered what that is.
Right.
But then they're going to respond to meeting their needs like a phlegmatic. So in other words, if a melancholy, let's say, needs some quiet time, well, he's going to respond like a phlegmatic, and instead of taking 2 hours of quiet time all by themselves, maybe it would be an hour. So it's just a little bit less.
So not quite as harsh, not quite as fierce as the pure melancholy would be in that area.
That's
It's
right.
kind of like a lesser version.
It's a lesser version.
Not as suspicious, not as distrustful.
Right.
Not as much of a victim complex, although those things can be there in a melancholy who's operating in weakness, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So then let's turn it around and talk about the phlegmatic melancholy, which means they express as a phlegmatic, but they respond or they want to receive behavior from others as a melancholy. What does that look like? How different is that from the melancholy phlegmatic?
Yeah, so it's different in the sense that in this case, the person's going to show up like a phlegmatic, but then they're going to respond to everything like a melancholy. So the phlegmatic can do both tasks and people fairly evenly, but since you have the melancholy pairing there, they are definitely going to lean more toward tasks than people. So
Right.
it's a shift. So they're going to be really good leaders, but everything that the phlegmatic is doing, the melancholy is meeting that need. So let's say understanding feelings of others would be something that the phlegmatic struggles with. Phlegmatic melancholy is really going to have a difficult time
Right.
understanding other people's feelings. And so they're just going to be a little bit on the darker side, meaning more negative, tend to go down a little bit
In
quicker.
conjunction with aloofness and tendency to be distant, not caring as much, like they have to work really hard to actually get their thoughts to focus on how others are seeing things, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And the phlegmatic melancholy is going to be much more prone to procrastinating and just really not getting involved because they're trying to manage their energy levels at all times.
Right. Another temperament that's very common is the melancholy and control. So let's switch gears a little bit and go from inclusion, which is the thinking, the surface relationships and interaction, to more on decision making and willpower. So when we're talking about a melancholy and control, why does a melancholy who is melancholy or melancholy phlegmatic in the control area make such a good decision maker?
Well, one, they're just not very easily influenced by other people, and they will consider every detail possible. They will think about it all because that's what they do best. I mean, they really will think about every single angle.
So they're very analytical.
Very analytical, and they want to please others, but they are not motivated by that. So they are seeking approval, but more so that they look good. It's really not to be. Some people they seek approval because they want to be part of the group. I mean, a melancholy could really care less. They just want to do a really good job. They do want to be recognized for that, but for the job itself, because they consider themselves worthless anyway. So
they really have reason to prove something to themselves.
They do. They're very hard on themselves, and so they take tasks very seriously.
As you know, the melancholy and control is a highly independent person. How does this affect the relationships of this person, and how are the other people affected by the decisions made by the melancholy and control?
So that's a really good question. The melancholy is just going to do what they're going to do. They are not looking for input, and they're actually not even looking to sell what their ideas are to other people. And on one hand, that's part of what makes them a great leader. They are, I would say, more of a dictator type, but a quiet dictator. You know,
the silent dictator.
The silent dictator.
The silent tyrant.
Yes. And they are just going to continue doing what they're going to do. Now, in a big meeting or working on a team, it would be better if they could spearhead something and have other people bring them information that they could then compile and present, versus actually working with another one-on-one. That would absolutely wear them out.
Well, let's flip it around. So let's say it's a melancholy actually a phlegmatic melancholy, so they express in their control area as a phlegmatic, and they respond or want as a melancholy. What does that person look like?
That person would be much better working on a team, and they would certainly be able to come across probably a little bit more gregarious, although they would still be limiting their interaction with people. This is not life of the party. Just having the phlegmatic there does not make them life of the party. It just makes them a little softer, a little bit more approachable, but also a little bit better at rolling with problems that come up, problems that inner situations throw melancholies more so than probably anyone else, and then they just don't typically articulate issues with others, and so they just sit there and try to think about it and work it all out. And in one sense, the phlegmatic doesn't help them with that, because the phlegmatic will sit around thinking about issues all the time and never do anything about it. But the melancholy portion of that combination does help them to actually do something about it, actually make a decision. So that's a nice,
awesome.
Nice
we have to wrap up this segment after this, but we didn't really spend a lot of time. We didn't spend any time yet talking about the melancholy and affection. So just real quick, you and I know that melancholies and affection, they don't often express their deep, tender feelings, even though they have a lot of them. And also, they're very loyal, faithful people to their close relationships, the loved ones, family members, spouses, and so on. How would you counsel someone to actually reveal their deeper inner emotions if they're a melancholy and affection?
Yeah, just because they don't express their feelings or affection doesn't mean that they don't have those really deep and, like you said, tender feelings. They do. They are so loyal. They are absolutely just very loving people. But the expression can be hard to actually know what to do with if you're an outsider looking in. I mean, if you're in with a melancholy, you're in for life kind of thing. And you will absolutely be able to go deep with them if you want to. So, just suggesting that the melancholy express or articulate or show, be a little bit more demonstrative with their affection really goes a long way to encourage the other people in their life. That, oh, okay, you do love me and you do care and you do, it's just tough for the melancholy to naturally do that. They've got to get out of their comfort
They got to train their
zone a little
minds.
bit. They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Okay, awesome. So thanks again for being here. I'm really looking forward to this
Thank you
whole
for having
series,
me.
doing it with you.
Me too.
And we're going to have a great time.
Yeah. Thank you.